Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Jennifer Scafidi, Second Vice President of NOBIDA, the Northern Ohio branch of the International Dyslexia Association, and I would like to welcome all of you to our 32nd annual symposium, Originally Ohio. We are so excited to be able to share with you critical information today regarding our state, including House Bill 436, which is an original Ohio bill written originally by Ohioans. Our experts that will be sharing their knowledge with you today and expertise are all originally Ohio born and raised and are now working in our schools and state to help those with dyslexia. This symposium looks much different than it has the last 31 years. Our live audience is much smaller as we adhere to all CDC guidelines. We have hundreds of viewers watching us live from their homes and offices today, a first for our branch. Everyone will also be able to review and watch the recorded version of this entire symposium between March 8th and April 8th. 5 CEUs will be given for all of those that watch the entire symposium. Graduate credit is also available. Please check out the slides that will be rotating during our live stream and our recorded version, and this information can also be found on our website. I would like to thank Walsh University for hosting us today and for filming our keynote speaker. At this time, I'd like to introduce Vicki Karnick.
Good morning, and welcome to the 32nd annual NOBIDA Symposium. I'm super excited to be here today. Like Jen said, my name is Vicki Karnick, and I am actually a past board member of NOBIDA. At one point, I served on the executive committee, and it was actually my job to plan this conference that I did for several years back in the early 2000s. But about 6 years ago, God drastically shifted my life and my work, and I currently serve as the executive director of a nonprofit ministry named Hannah's Home in Mentor, Ohio, that houses pregnant women and babies. So I'm actually super excited to be here today because of what I get to do. So I'm here for 2 very important connections that I have to your keynote speaker. One dates back to early 1998 when our journey into the field of dyslexia began, and the second connection that we have together actually dates back nearly 47 years to August 3rd, 1974, when I was born, and I made her an older sister. So most siblings could not work together. Most siblings couldn't even work together, which for 20 years we did, which speaks to our love and support for each other. But not only did we work together, we did all of our, most of our training together. So like I said, it all began in the summer of 1998 when we took the NOBIDA workshop, and now she's gonna make me cry, together at Notre Dame, and it was taught by Ellen Brick and Lori Josephson. We both fell in love that week, that summer workshop week that we did, with the content, the work, the mission of dyslexia, and the IDA. So we pursued more Wilson training, Orton Gillingham training, everything that we could get, we devoured. So we began traveling to the national IDA conferences every year, and we now hold some of the most magnificent memories that I will treasure for the rest of my life in doing those things together. So just a few of them, to be very brief, include paying $40 for a side salad that we shared, paying $40 each for a side salad that we shared at a very expensive restaurant. Going on early runs and getting lost in every single city that we went to, and a very close call, almost getting robbed at a gas station on our way back to the airport. We were young and not very well seasoned at traveling. But one day, somewhere around 2004, I came up with a bright idea that I was going to get my master's, and I wanted it in a very special program. So I called her and I said, I found a master's degree in language therapy that I'm going to get, or going to apply for. So she responded, well, you aren't doing that without me. And so I said, well, it's in Texas. And so this was a time period before online school. And so we traveled back and forth to Dallas, Texas about 9 times a year for 4 years to earn our master's degree from Southern Methodist University. So those years entailed massive amounts of tears and sleepless nights, but luckily we did not have breakdowns at the same time. And so we could support each other. Those years involved a lot of retail therapy and running. The trips, the hotel attendants on those trips often did not believe that we were there for school, as we would come back with so many shopping bags at the end of the day. We had to convince them that we were there for school. But we walked that journey hand in hand, getting each other through, and graduated, like I said, in 2009 with our master's in language therapy from Southern Methodist University. We had not even graduated yet. And Rebecca was already researching and securing where she was going to go for her doctorate. And I was done. I said, not me, not so much. And she was confident and focused in what she wanted. She knew what she wanted. Right around the time that we graduated from SMU, there was a lot happening in the state of Ohio as far as passing laws to improve the recognition, identification, and definition of dyslexia into laws. To improve the education for these children. My sister worked alongside Stephanie Gordon, Pam Camper, and so many others to ensure that these laws were passed. And once they were, teachers needed training. And so we worked together, the two of us, to make a program happen in Ohio through SMU, which we obtained our qualified instructor license, our qualified instructor certificate. Once we held that, we were then qualified to begin training teachers and qualifying them under the guidelines of IMSLEC. So that was the birth of our company together, named Keystone Literacy. We ran cycles of classes of teachers through training and impacting hundreds of teachers and students throughout Northeast Ohio. So even though our paths have separated as far as careers are concerned, we will always be sisters who love each other and support each other. I have watched Dr. Rebecca Tolson work harder than anyone. I know for what she believes in, her work with integrity, loyalty, and passion. She is a genuine and authentic person and knows what she is talking about. And it is my absolute undying honor to introduce her today as your keynote speaker, Dr. Rebecca Tolson.
Wow. Give me a moment. Oh, thank you, Vicki, and thank you for NOBIDA for extending the offer for me to present today. I want to start with a very personal story to follow that very personal story. So this is my 30th year in education. I graduated from Cleveland State University in 1991, majoring in elementary education. The ironic thing is, I did not even have aspirations of going to college. See, I first learned I loved teaching when I taught swimming lessons at the Ashtabula YMCA at 15 years old. I would teach children how to do the butterfly kick, and I would model on the pool deck how to use their whole body to move yourself through the water in such a difficult stroke. And I would get in with them, and I would hold them, and I would teach them how to raise their elbow. What was the perfect way to get through the water? But you know what? School was hard for me. I only enjoyed typing and shorthand. And people today don't even know what shorthand is. My plan was to become a secretary. But my swim coach, and boy, I'm being raw here by putting this picture up. And my husband has not seen these yet. So my swim coach saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. I had been a competitive swimmer from the age of 7. My swim coach, Mr. Bomford, insisted on striving for a college scholarship. I didn't believe I was good enough. But sitting in my parents' living room was the Cleveland State University swim coach across from my parents saying, "I'll take care of her." And he did. I got a full college scholarship to Cleveland State, and that was like a deer in headlights for me because I wasn't sure I could make it. So I went to my English teacher, Mrs. Anderson, as a senior, and I said, "Do you think I can make it in college?" Sorry. And she said to me, "If you work hard, you can do it." There's one thing my parents taught me, is how to work hard. If anyone knows my parents, oh my, they know how to work hard. I remember waking up in the morning and my mom's turning on the light saying, "Rise and shine at 7 o'clock, you're wasting the day away." So we were definitely trained to work hard. But when it came time to enroll, testing revealed I wasn't ready for college. I had not taken college preparatory classes. So they suggested I enroll in remedial classes to brush up those basics and then move me into college classes, which is what I did. And I remember my parents saying, "Well, Becky, that's a great place to start. This is a great opportunity." They never made me feel like I was less than. So I did graduate from college, and here is a picture of my husband and I, who is here to support me today. So thank you, Todd. I became a 5th grade teacher, and I loved the classroom. That was a sweet spot for me. 5th grade, amazing. But what pained me was that kiddos came to my classroom not reading well. I didn't know really what to do. I didn't know how to teach reading from the start, and that's really what my students needed. So, luckily, and Vicki mentioned, I worked at a school, and a colleague of mine in the Fairlawn area, Lori Josephson, said, "You need to take a Norton Gillingham class." If anybody knows Lori Josephson, you know what I'm talking about. And she kept sending me flyers. And she said, you know, she gave me resources, but she said, "You need to take a class." So that was the journey that led to my passion, because I learned more in that first class at Notre Dame College, taught by Ellen and Lori, than I had in all the 5 years put together that I had taught 5th grade. So more than 20 years of my career has been devoted to dyslexia. Never did I imagine being part of a legislative process beginning to author 3 dyslexia laws. Never did I imagine earning my doctorate degree, and when my dissertation committee assigned me the topic of identification of dyslexia, I cried. Because I'm not a school psychologist. I'm not a speech language pathologist, and I don't specialize in assessment. I was scared. I'm a practitioner. I'll talk all day about intervention. Why identification? Well, this is why. The presentation today is meant to inspire educators in Ohio and beyond to unite in the cause of dyslexia, because it matters. The topic is identification of dyslexia in Ohio. When we know better, we do better. The point is not just to know better. The point is to make things better. Consistent and sustained improvement in education has been hard, despite the best efforts of policymakers and educators and programs. We have not identified enough children early. If I can identify dyslexia, so can you. What happens if we don't identify dyslexia early? Older students with dyslexia suffer with depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. A former student of mine came to me at 42 years of age, wanting help learning to read. She was identified with a reading disability in 2nd grade, but testing revealed her reading level at a 3rd grade. She was functionally illiterate. We worked together several days a week using a structured literacy program, and in 1 year's time, her reading level grew 5 years. So at an 8th grade level, she could read things she never imagined was possible. I reflect on a memory that she shared with me. A milestone for her was reading a menu at Dunkin' Donuts. She gained confidence, ending an unhealthy relationship. And I remember studying note cards because she wanted to become a truck driver, and we studied for her tests together. It matters that not only we identify, but we treat dyslexia early. Unfortunately, my former student is not alone. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, 1 in 5, or 43 million adults in the U.S. have low literacy. Functional illiteracy is defined as having math, reading, or language skills below the 4th grade level. At this level, people may struggle to read a bus schedule, a medicine bottle, or a job application. A few statistics about illiteracy. An adult without a high school diploma earns 42% less than an adult with a diploma. The percentage of adults without a high school diploma who live in poverty is twice that of those who have a high school diploma. And this one hit me the most. A mother's reading skill level is the greatest determinant of her children's future academic success and outweighs factors like neighborhood and family income. In Ohio, 54% of adults are less than proficient in literacy, and numeracy according to the program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies published in 2020. Why do so many adults in our state lack literacy skills? It's not due to a lack of knowledge about how reading works. The science of reading dates back many years. Goff and Tunmer in the mid-1980s published The Simple View of Reading. There are two domains. There is word recognition, which is our decoding. There's language comprehension that equal reading comprehension, which is understanding and remembering what you read. Our ultimate goal. Anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So simplistically, if either domain is weak, our reading comprehension is negatively impacted. So in 2012, Goff and Chapman updated the Simple View. This is a journey of what we know about teaching reading. The four-part processing model, published by Marilyn Adams in 1990, illustrates how the big 5 essentials of reading, work. And they build on the foundation of the phonological processor, which is sounds, and the orthographic processor, which is letters. Put together, that's sound-symbol correspondence, which is phonics. The understanding of word meaning in the meaning processor depends on children being able to read independently. So that's why you see her model showing meaning coming out of that ability. Lastly, reading connected text within context, phrases, sentences, passages. That is dependent on ingredients of language like syntax, semantics, and putting it all together in text structures like narrative and expository text, different types of reading. Dr. Scarborough illustrates the sub-skills of reading through the reading rope illustration. Skilled reading is defined as the fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension through the integration of multifaceted skills, each strand representing one of those skills. This is acquired through the gradual instruction and practice of our teachers. They prescribe the amount of instruction and the amount of practice needed to master reading. Just the right amount. In 2003, we advanced our knowledge of reading and the reading brain through fMRIs. The work of Sally Shaywitz from Yale, publishing the book Overcoming Dyslexia. If you've never read it, please do. Seminal work. The features and systems of the reading brain that are activated in a typical reader. We can see the blood flow, the white matter activated in a reader that's reading on grade level. Each area responsible for a different activity. You have the sound layer. You have the analysis of words, which you see in the parieto-temporal lobe. And then, my favorite, the occipital temporal, is where automaticity happens, instant word recognition. All areas activate simultaneously like a concert. We have advanced our knowledge of the reading brain since the seminal work of the Shawitzes. In 2010, Stanislas Dehaene, a French author and cognitive neuroscience scientist, published his book, Reading in the Brain, and a modern vision of the networks for reading. How reading develops is clearly understood through biological and scientific findings. However, we cannot ignore factors that associate with reading achievement, such as socioeconomic status, as well as home literacy environments, and what a teacher brings to the process, and also the student's cognitive ability. In addition to biological or environmental factors associated with reading achievement, Goff and Tunberg's simple view of reading can be displayed on a continuum. Now remember the equation: decoding multiplied by language comprehension equals reading comprehension. So a typical reader is good at both, which you see in the top right quadrant on this slide. The bottom left is the student that is poor at both and typically mixed difficulties that most likely qualifies them for special education. The bottom right quadrant is good at decoding, so they read words accurately and fluently, but they lack comprehension skills. And the top left quadrant is the profile of dyslexia, where the decoding is poor, but the language comprehension is good. So I always tell people when they ask me, children with dyslexia, their listening comprehension is at or above grade level. So if somebody's reading to them, they get it. But if their reading level is one or more grade levels below. So it's not a thinking concern. They think well. The most commonly recognized definition of dyslexia states that dyslexia is a neurobiological in origin, and it's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include experiences that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, I had to memorize that when I went through my language therapy degree, and I remember putting it on note cards. And every class that I teach on dyslexia, I tell my teachers, know it. Know it. Here's what we know. The neural signature of dyslexia represents a disruption of the posterior reading systems. Notice the enlarged frontal cortex on the brain with dyslexia and the absence of activity on the posterior areas that typical readers engage. There's a difference in the brain. It's neurological. Don't ever tell me that it's because a child doesn't want to read. They all do. They are not trying to learn their letters in kindergarten. This is something that is made up in their brain, and we see that here. So the definition provides us with the key symptoms to identify dyslexia. which are poor decoding, fluency, spelling, and deficits in the phonological processing. However, we can identify early the tendencies of dyslexia in phonological awareness tasks like segmentation, blending, isolation, and manipulation at the phoneme level. Students with early tendencies have difficulties learning their letter names and rapid naming of objects, colors, letters, and numbers. Other weaknesses include sound-symbol correspondence, which is phonics, phonological memory, and word recognition fluency. So when they're sounding out words that have more than just a couple sounds, 3 or 4, or words with blends, those sounds get jumbled up in there. And they miss some. So they're making errors like transpositions, reversals, because they get those sounds confused. It's not a visual processing. It's not what they're seeing. It's the processing of sounds in order and clearly and efficiently. So I remember seeing a video by Sally Shaywitz that she said, those sounds are not crisp. Primary difficulties associated with dyslexia. You see them listed here. Reading words in isolation. So if children have a list of words that do not have context, they have trouble reading them. Decoding unfamiliar words. Just take a sample on like the Woodcock-Johnsons where you do word attack. If they're unfamiliar words or made-up words, they can't decode them. Spelling. You can see, spelling is a window into what children are doing with language. What comes out on paper, and it gives you a clear picture. I always analyze spelling. And a very good mentor of mine at NIHouse had said, she told me, she says, if a child can spell it, they can read it. Think about that. Oral reading fluency. In 1 or 2 minutes, we can see if they're in first grade reading 12 minutes a word, 12 words a minute, and the other kiddos are reading 30 and 40 and 50 words a minute, we've got problems. Something's disconnected. The secondary consequences because of those difficulties are reading experiences. They read less. They don't go to the reading corner because they want to run to and read a book. It's hard. Vocabulary acquisition. The less they read, the less they're gaining in vocabulary from books. Reading comprehension is impeded, we saw in the simple view, and written expression is often a secondary consequence. McCardle proposes a hybrid model for the identification of dyslexia that combines multiple indicators or criteria, including impaired phonological awareness, genetic risk, and reading-related skills. I love that this model includes the family history, which allows the process to be expedited for those students with family history showing red flags for reading failure. Nadine Gabb, Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Boston Hospital and Harvard Medical School, published an article entitled, "It's a Myth that Young Children Cannot Be Screened for Dyslexia." We know as early as age 4 which students are going to struggle learning foundational skills for reading. Screening for dyslexia contributes to early identification and intervention. Screeners must be valid and reliable.
identifying students that are at risk and students who are not at risk. Performance-based measures, where students have to perform and complete specific tasks. And a rating scale requires a teacher or a parent or an individual to respond to a series of statements or questions. For early identification to be accurate, screening must yield a high percentage of true positives, which is the sensitivity rate, and while limiting the false positives, which is your specificity rate, producing a manageable risk pool. We're going to get to that later. Compton and colleagues set up the ideal specificity rate at greater than 80% and the ideal sensitivity rate at greater than 90%. I've included 3 sample dyslexia screening protocols today. Not that this is the only way. This is not cookie cutter. It's very important to understand that there is not one test for dyslexia. A combination of measures for the key indicators can be used from a variety of assessments, such as the KTEA 3rd edition dyslexia index you see here. I've included subtests for kindergarten and 1st grade, as well as subtests for 2nd grade and beyond. The 2nd screening protocol sample features measures from the Wyatt 3. And the 3rd sample features the Shaywitz dyslexia screen, K-3 rating scale. It's an option that emphasizes phonological, linguistic, and academic performance from teacher observations. Please do not discount what teachers and parents notice early on in a child's career, because many say, I knew something was wrong in kindergarten. The Gab Lab produces updates of lists of early literacy assessments, screeners. The tool provides information on the research, the type of screener, the grade levels, the skills assessed,
whether it is print, digital, or computer adaptive. The Center for Response to Intervention also produces an academic screening tool chart, which includes the level of evidence for that screener, the classification accuracy, the technical standards, including validity and reliability. These tools help districts and schools identify the strengths and weaknesses of their screeners that contribute to early identification of risk across the grade levels. You may discover that the screener you're currently using is valid, but not reliable, or possibly lacks evidence. Most importantly, check the skills assessed for your screener. Does it target the key indicators of dyslexia? There are 8 key characteristics for an optimum screening battery. Early literacy screeners should be short, comprehensive, and resourceful. They should be administered early and include ESL and dialect considerations, neurobiological and genetic factors, and provide evidence. They need to be developmentally appropriate. So I highly recommend these resources for evaluating the effectiveness and best practices for dyslexia screening. So I included these links here for you as resources. So an effective response to intervention model involves a 4-step screening system. Universal screening is considered Tier 1 screening of all students for risk factors. My opinion, that should be done by October of kindergarten. Let's not wait. If they're going to struggle learning their letters and sounds and putting them together, don't wait. Progress monitoring of interventions occurs for those students who show risk. And a Tier 2 screening includes a norm referenced and standardized measure based on criteria and revision of procedures and cut scores. RTI's 2 goals is to identify at-risk students for early intervention and prevention, and recognize those whom such early intervention is going to be ineffective so they can receive more intensive instruction and possibly special education. A key contributing factor is that dyslexia is on a continuum from mild, moderate to severe, and their needs will be met in all the tiers of instruction at various levels of support. So if you're an educator, regardless of what tier you are teaching, you have students with dyslexia. It may be mild, it may be moderate, or if you're a special education teacher, it's probably more on the severe level. The best prognosis for individuals with dyslexia is when their learning deficits and the level of severity that I just spoke about are identified early. And evidence-based interventions are implemented with frequent progress monitoring. Katz and Hogan identified the window of opportunity for prevention, diagnosis, and treatment for pre-K through 3rd grade. A prevention model is more cost-effective for schools. My husband's a school treasurer. I always put that as a caveat. It is cost-effective with fewer negative consequences for those little ones. Less early reading failure for students. I've never met a teacher ever in all these years that didn't want to teach kids to read. Never. We all want our little ones reading. So before I move to shift to federal laws, I want to tell a little mama bear story. So a very good friend of mine and colleague, I didn't know her at the time, called and made an appointment with me, and I was working after school tutoring kids, loving it, raising my own kids who are now in their 20s. And she made an appointment, came into my office. I did not have any openings for tutoring. The testing revealed at school and the pre-assessments, baseline assessments I did in my structured literacy program revealed that this little 1st grader was below grade level. Maybe about a year. So 1st grader reading in a kindergarten level. And I explained the issues I saw and said, you know, I can put you on a wait list. I don't have any openings. And she says, well, I'm not leaving my office, your office, this seat, until you agree to take her. And I'm like, how am I going to get this lady out of my office? Let me tell you, that little girl was a twin. And when you've got 2 little babies and one reads and one doesn't, that mama bear was desperate. That little girl, so of course I took her. Right, honey? I never said no. It's hard. So I started working with her 1st, 2nd, 3rd. I remember the text from that mom. She passed her 3rd grade proficiency test in 3rd grade. She's now in high school in honors English. Smart little girl who struggled but never knew that it was harder for her because we took care of it early. So The window of opportunity. How does that sit with you? How could we do prevention? So now I'd like to shift our attention to policies for dyslexia. Why? Because my dissertation committee told me that's where I was going with my study. So I'm going to lead you on a journey with me, telling a story about what we know. There are 3 federal laws that protect rights of students with disabilities, learning disabilities like dyslexia. We have the Individuals with Disability Act, reauthorized in 2004. We have the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. Are these federal laws specifically protecting the rights of students with dyslexia? IDEA includes dyslexia as an example of a specific learning disability. A child is eligible to receive special education and/or related services if the child is determined to have a disability and as a result of that disability needs special education and related services. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services submitted a letter in October of 2015 to state and local education agencies stating that there may be situations where an individual education plan team could determine that personnel responsible for the IEP would need to know about the condition of dyslexia underlying the child's disability. For example, if a child qualifies under the category of SLD in basic reading, the child's IEP could include specific instructional supports, accommodations, and modifications shown to be useful for addressing the unique educational needs resulting from dyslexia. The letter also clarifies there is nothing in IDEA that would prohibit the use of the term dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia in IDEA evaluations, eligibility determinations, or IEP documents. The team determining eligibility would find it helpful to include information about the specific condition of dyslexia in documenting how that condition relates to the child's eligibility. Let's get all on the same page here. I've included an example of wording that can be used in an evaluation report and IEP document. This came from Texas, which is where my organization that I work for is located. Why is identifying and treating dyslexia so controversial? Dr. Sally Shaywitz testified to the Congressional Committee on Science, Technology, Space and Technology in 2014, where she states, in dyslexia, we have not a knowledge gap, but an action gap. We have the knowledge, but it is not being put into policy and practice. And far too many children and adults, too, are suffering needlessly. There is an epidemic of reading failure that we have the scientific evidence for treating effectively, and we're not acknowledging or implementing it. The current wave of research is in the translational science that addresses the transfer of what we know from science to application in the classroom. I encourage you to read the article by Emily Solari from the University of Virginia on translational science, what we know into the classroom. The lack of policies, practices, and protections for students with dyslexia at the federal level led to state dyslexia laws. The first state to pass a dyslexia law was Texas in 1995. Currently, only 4 states have no dyslexia-specific law: Hawaii, Idaho, South Dakota, and Vermont. However, South Dakota and Vermont have bills pending in committees as of February 2021. Departments of Education have published handbooks, guidance documents on dyslexia. In addition, several states have prepared guidelines, topic briefs, technical assistance documents for the primary purpose of clarifying how dyslexia identification relates to special education eligibility. State laws have also mandated screening for dyslexia. In 2011, Ohio passed 2 dyslexia laws. House Bill 96 established a pilot project to test, evaluate, and share with the General Assembly the results of the delivery of early screening and intervention services for children showing characteristics of dyslexia. The law also specified in the state statutes that dyslexia isn't a specific learning disability for which a child may receive special education services. An annual evaluation of that dyslexia pilot project was done from 2012 to 2016. It was conducted by the University of Cincinnati and is available on the ODE website on the dyslexia page. The Ohio Dyslexia Pilot Project supported games for students at risk for dyslexia associated with early identification, screening, and intervention. Evaluators used a time cost saving metric to calculate the cost based on the teacher's median hourly rate multiplied by the number of minutes of intervention provided weekly, multiplied by the number of students served by the teacher. For students receiving Tier 3 interventions who showed a rate of improvement that moved beyond the expected growth based on the DIBELS benchmark goals, the reduction in risk precluded the need for intensive and costly Tier 3 intervention. I've listed the total projected cost saving by school district from the Ohio Dyslexia Pilot. So early identification and intervention saves money. I want to say it saves lives. House Bill 157 was also passed the same year. It provides Ohio schools can contract with an educational service center to provide teacher training related to dyslexia in evidence-based reading, multisensory, structured language instruction. For professional development, the professional development must be provided by a dyslexia specialist as outlined in the International Dyslexia Association's Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teachers of Reading. Ohio House Bill 157 provides training for current teachers so they will understand how to teach children with dyslexia. However, the law is permissive. It's not mandated. Therefore, districts may choose not to participate in professional development in the area of dyslexia under House Bill 157. So let's move to House Bill 436. It was passed into law on January 9th of this year. The name of the law is Connor's Odyssey, the Right to Read Law. House Bill 436 establishes an Ohio Dyslexia Committee that is interdisciplinary with required certification and expertise in dyslexia. These are appointed positions to that committee. The Ohio Committee is charged with developing a dyslexia guidebook, recommending appropriate ratios for students to teachers for certification to identify and address dyslexia, providing multisensory structured language professional development, assisting school districts in establishing a multidisciplinary team to support identification, intervention, and remediation of dyslexia, developing reporting mechanisms for districts and schools to submit the required information and data to ODE, developing academic standards for kindergarten in reading and writing that incorporate the multisensory structured literacy program. The Ohio Dyslexia Guidebook will include best practices and methods for universal screening, intervention, and remediation. According to the law, it will be developed by December 31st of this year, with public input in an electronic format, and is subject to final approval by the state school board. The Ohio Dyslexia Committee will update the guidebook as necessary. The Ohio Department of Ed and the Ohio Dyslexia Committee will assist districts with the process to identify reliable, valid, universal, and evidence-based screening and intervention measures for K-5 literacy skills. Identify each student at risk of dyslexia based on results of the Tier 1 screening. And notify parents and guardians or custodians that the student with dyslexia has been identified as being at risk. So I've included the schedule for screening. In 2022-23, House Bill 436 provides the schedule for the universal screening that ranges from January of kindergarten to January of first grade, with first through sixth grade being upon request of a parent or guardian, custodian, or a classroom teacher. Remember, I always said the teacher always knows. There's a gut. So they can request if they're concerned. For school year 23-24, grades 4 to 6, Tier 1 universal screening is requested by a parent or guardian or custodian and classroom teacher. So just in case we missed any, let's continue to identify if we need to. It's never too late. Remember, we go back to my 42-year-old that I worked with. So additionally, districts must administer Tier 1 screening measures to K-6 grade transfer students within 30 days of enrollment if they come in without that screening measure with them. Follow-up progress monitoring every 2 weeks for 3 cycles is required for students showing risk for dyslexia. Districts that use a Tier 1 screener use a Tier 2 screener at the onset are exempt from this requirement. The conversations I've had, so in progress monitoring, a lot of districts are doing the progress monitoring. We kind of have to tighten it up to say that if it's not worked in 6 weeks, we probably need to look at something more intensive in what we're doing, whether it's more explicit time, more explicit intensity in what we're providing them, and are we hitting the target areas. Districts are required to administer a Tier 2 screening measure to each at-risk student who does not show significant progress toward attaining that grade level reading and writing skills by the 6th week. After the student is identified as at risk on the Tier 1 screener, a Tier 2 screener is norm referenced and standardized. A popular Tier 2 screener, doesn't have to be this one, like I said, there's many measures out there, but a popular one is the CTOP because it has a phonological awareness, phonological memory, and rapid automatized naming measures. Some districts use the CTOP as their Tier 1 screener. Parents must be notified of the Tier 2 screener results within 30 days of administration. And I'm going to close with something on this. So keep this one in mind. Parents must be notified. Parents of the students scoring below the 20th percentile on this Tier 2 screener must be provided with information about reading development, the risk factors of dyslexia, and descriptions of evidence-based interventions. Districts must provide the parent or guardian with a written explanation of the district or school's structured literacy program if the student demonstrates markers of dyslexia. Structured literacy components explain what is taught and how the delivery is how it's taught. A structured literacy routine systematically teaches the language using a scope and sequence. This is my sweet spot. This is what I spent 20 years doing. But today's presentation, this is a whole other talk for another time. Today's presentation is on identification, but now what do we do when we know that they're at risk? We know what to do. Many, many teachers have been trained in that, in structured literacy. The Ohio Dyslexia Committee will create and update a list of professional development approved courses on evidence-based instruction, identification, and pedagogy for dyslexia. Coursework will adhere to the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading and align to the guidebook developed by the interdisciplinary team. There will be online and face-to-face options for those trainings. I just want to say as a side note that I get a lot of emails and questions on the professional development. It has not been decided. It will be in the guidebook that will come out at the end of this year. But the reason I do know is that we will align to the International Dyslexia Association because they have the accreditation to say they're internationally recognized for the programs that meet the needs of students with dyslexia. I've listed the professional development criteria schedule for you. Previous training from approved courses will count toward PD hours. So I know that's another big question that's out there. And if you have invested in your teachers, which I know a lot of you, especially here sitting with me today, have done that, that will be recognized if it's a part of that list from the guidebook. Now, districts are charged with starting the process of certification for dyslexia, according to House Bill 436. The Ohio Dyslexia Committee will make dyslexia certification recommendations based on accreditation standards by 2 accreditation bodies. So International Dyslexia Association accredits programs, and so does IMSLEC, the International Multisensory Structured Language Education Council. This conference has a recorded session devoted to House Bill 436. Please take the time to watch and learn more from the Ohio Dyslexia Legislative Committee that worked for 5 years to make this bill a reality. A common question about dyslexia law is who will pay for it? The Boston Consulting Group published a white paper in 2020 addressing the economic impact of dyslexia in California. The paper states that neglecting dyslexia learning has a huge financial cost to society. Dyslexia will cost the state of California, according to the white paper, $12 million in 2020. Projecting out the next 60 years, the lifetime of a student entering school will cost, the cost will be $1 trillion for the state of California. These costs accumulate over time, starting in kindergarten and continuing throughout an individual's lifespan. The cost of dyslexia included state variables related to education, litigation, unemployment, and criminal justice system. In California, the prison cost attributable to the needs of students with dyslexia is approximately $4.5 billion. Lost GDP from unemployment was a key data point used to estimate the cost using the percentage of prevalence of dyslexia in each population in comparison to the general population. On average, families are spending $15,000 to $20,000 per year on additional support for a child with dyslexia. This contributes to dyslexia being a social equity issue. There are also non-financial costs to improperly diagnosing dyslexia. For many students with dyslexia, school can be agonizing, and if unidentified, can cause social and emotional impacts such as low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. The prevalence of dyslexia is 15 to 20% of the population. There are approximately 1.7 K-12 students in Ohio, which means that there are approximately 300,000 K-12 students with dyslexia in Ohio. Now, I'd like to shift to a case study I conducted at the University of Akron on federal and state policies related to the identification of dyslexia in Ohio public schools. The research design was qualitative, which allowed for a discussion of experiences to be analyzed and then themes to emerge on the topic. I got to be honest with you, I was so excited to get in and talk to teachers because I was a teacher. What are they feeling on the topic? What do they know? What are their weaknesses? What are their concerns? I couldn't wait to get in the classroom. So the problem I identified was that federal law, IDEA, lacks specificity for dyslexia. IDEA lists dyslexia as an example, but doesn't provide a definition. And it doesn't tell us how to identify and provide instructional services. The implementation of the law is left up to the individual states. State dyslexia laws vary, as we discussed earlier. So does identification and treatment of dyslexia depend on what state you live in? The purpose of the study was to investigate the implementation of federal and state policies related to dyslexia, to explore the constructs of dyslexia and determine how federal and state policies for dyslexia are implemented in Ohio K-12 public schools. Which led to the research question: how do Ohio K-12 educators interpret and implement federal and state policies for students identified with dyslexia or showing dyslexic tendencies? The significance of the study was to inform the body of literature on the topic related to the financial, social, and emotional consequences for early identification and intervention. Interviews were conducted and documents were collected. As the researcher of this study, my bias is that I have a family history of dyslexia and the influence of my training as a certified dyslexia therapist. Data was collected at 3 public school districts in Ohio, all having similar demographics and K-3 state reading scores. 5 themes emerged from the data. The first finding was that districts interpret and implement federal and state policies for the identification of students with dyslexia or dyslexic tendencies differently, which creates confusion amongst educators and parents. I provide a quote for each district showing that practices are inconsistent, ranging from districts that have written policies, referrals to outside agencies, and identification under IDEA SLD category. So I just wanted to make sure you had the data. And of course, if you ever want to have a conversation about the data, I've got lots of data, so I'd love to sit down with you sometime, have a cup of coffee. Theme 2 relates to the perceptions and misperceptions of dyslexia. IDEA lacks specificity regarding the definition of dyslexia. States have passed laws to include the clear definition. However, there remains inconsistent understanding amongst educators of what dyslexia is and how to treat it. A few statistics that I pulled from the data: 33% of the participants and 66% of the teachers I interviewed believe the myth that dyslexia is reversing letters. Only 20% of the participants interviewed described dyslexia as a specific learning disability. 53%, little over half, of the participants recognized dyslexia as a neurological condition. Only 33% of participants mentioned phonological deficits when defining dyslexia. Clearly, educators cannot identify and remediate what they do not know and understand. The identification of dyslexia depends on the knowledge of educators. The third theme showed varied screening and assessment practices for dyslexia. One district uses formal procedures and practices for screening, progress monitoring, and evaluation of special education services related to dyslexia using the CTOP, a Tier 2 screener on all students in kindergarten. Other districts hesitate to identify dyslexia during the screening process due to the sheer volume of students that may show risk. The fourth theme that emerged from the data highlights district challenges related to meeting the needs of students with dyslexia. Districts use a variety of instructional strategies, such as phonics routines, phonological awareness activities, multisensory teaching, and recognize these require additional training and certification. The data reveals that districts are attempting to provide structured literacy in Ohio. No doubt. There was not a doubt, but with many barriers, such as time, schedules, resources, and training. The final theme relates to parental lack of trust in districts regarding identification of dyslexia. District C found that when they began formally identifying dyslexia, they started earning the trust of their parents, which allowed the district the opportunity to educate parents about dyslexia and the learning needs of their children. A district protocol for the identification of dyslexia provides clarity for families. The following 6 recommendations are based on the findings of the study. That K-12 districts establish consistent district practices for the identification of dyslexia using a district dyslexia protocol with goals, personnel able to diagnose, Dyslexia, when to complete the dyslexia battery, elements of the assessment battery, severity ratings, and eligibility language for the evaluation team report. I included a sample dyslexia protocol in the additional resources handout that includes the assessment measures, the criteria for severity rating, and verbiage for eligibility criteria under IDEA. It's not against the law. We have districts in Ohio doing it. And I remember the words from the interview. We pushed in. We were not breaking the law. We pushed in. Recommendation 2 is university program accreditation and K-12 professional development for dyslexia, which promotes the systematic evaluation and refinement for educator preparation programs in alignment with IDEA's research-based knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. I have to say, I've seen universities over the past year push in. Thank you, Dr. Brobeck and Walsh University, for hosting us, for becoming a, what was it, Dr. Brobeck, like a site membership to IDEA, to saying we're behind this. Our teachers need to know this. I know there's other universities in our state doing the same. Recommendation 3 is to create mandatory screening protocol for dyslexia. Recommendation 4 is for K-12 districts to implement structured literacy which meet the instructional needs of students with dyslexia. Recommendation 5 is K-12 districts deliver consistent communications of all stakeholders throughout the process of determining eligibility for special education services for students with dyslexia. One of the most beautiful parts to the dyslexia protocol was that if a child doesn't meet the special education criteria, they allowed to say, this is mild dyslexia that doesn't qualify you, but it still has a name. We recognize your child's struggle. Just because you don't meet the criteria for that doesn't mean you don't need additional supports. So we recognize you. I loved that. The more students and parents know about the characteristics of dyslexia, the more a parent will be able to support their child through the academic process, but also express concerns over their child's progress. Both students and parents will be empowered to ask important questions about the decisions being made for their child at school. I always said I became a better teacher when I became a mom. Please reference the additional resources packet for the dyslexia checklist for the K-12 school districts, universities, and state departments. My dissertation committee had me put that in the addendum of my dissertation at the very last before I defended because they really felt we needed a roadmap. As Frederick Douglass wisely warned, it is easier to build strong children than repair broken men. In the case of dyslexia, the earlier we can intervene in a student's life, the less of a toll it will take on his or her sense of confidence and competency. Identification is the first step in explaining the struggles and securing the necessary supports. Students have a much better chance of inhabiting their potential if they and their parents and teachers believe in it. Here are a few resources specifically addressing identification of dyslexia. They've helped me grow. Best thing I ever did was join the Northern Ohio branch of IDA. Most of these individuals are my personal friends now. A common mission, hardworking people that care. I encourage you to join. So I'd like to close with a short story related to my family history of dyslexia. My niece texted me just a couple weeks ago. She doesn't live in this state, with concerns about her 7-year-old son who receives Tier 2 instruction in reading. We scheduled a call and discussed her concerns, and she shared his math testing with me. So send me the test results, let me take a look. The testing reveals his phonological weaknesses, and he lacks basic knowledge of letter identification. Many students in mid-first grade are reading books, chapter books even. My nephew is not one of them. So let me tell you what Aunt Becky did. We've been meeting on Zoom. There is no way that one of my family members is going to slip through the cracks. The challenge is personal for me. This runs in my family. The rest of my life will be devoted to advocacy for students with dyslexia. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, so much for that amazing presentation. Your story's such an inspiration, and your knowledge is amazing. And now, I'm not going to cry. That woman that would not leave her chair is forever grateful. That was me. No one did that. We are blessed to have you as part of our board and throughout our state. So, now, not emotional. Okay, so once again, I want to thank Walsh University for helping us with this new format. And right now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brobeck to come up here and say a few words.
Hi everyone, I'm David Brobeck. I serve as the program director of the graduate education program here. And really what I wanted to say today is share something that is very exciting for us. Last Friday, the Walsh Faculty Senate approved our decision to move forward with a master's degree for a dyslexic specialist. Yesterday, we sent the letter to the state asking for the processes to go forward. Probably the most exciting thing was there was no forms for us to say that this is the new program because they haven't classified it yet, as you heard Rebecca say. But we are going to partner with in-house education to make sure that we can hit the ground running. Our goal, if the state will help us, is to launch this summer. So, again, we want to thank the Northern Ohio branch of IDEA. We believe so strongly in this as it ties to our overall program of dealing with literacy. Walsh is a reading science institution. We have gone to the science with both our undergraduate and our graduate program, our TESOL endorsement program, our instructors, if they haven't already gone through training in the science of reading, are currently going through training so that we can connect our entire program to support the good work that NOBIDA is doing, that Rebecca is doing, and we can move forward in a great partnership with the state of Ohio and share what we know. So thank you.
And we also want to thank our live audience who are in attendance today. And those of you watching remotely, I'm speaking to you right now. Our next presentation will begin at 10:30. And if you can log off of Sprout and on to Zoom by 10:30, that will give you access to our panel discussion.